Welcome back to the magical and mystical
And wonderful.
yes, and wonderful adventures of Gordon. Episode 2, King Shwebbie. So, let me see if I can pick up where we left off. Gordon felt a chill go up his spine and back down again. The feeling of any kind of security was washed out of his body the second he crossed the magical barrier. Everything seemed so much more serious as he drew closer and closer to King Shwebbie's kingdom. He wondered what the place looked like and how the people were. With what Ella told him, it was a grim and awful world compared to the magical side of the island. He took a peek at the map to make sure he was on the right path when the nostril hairs in his nose stood to attention as he inhaled the smell of musty farts through his nose.
Poor jeez,
He exclaimed.
what on earth is that?
He said. He put the map away and continued on towards the village. As he closed in on the village, he took in the sights, sounds, and fart-like smells. Yuck! As he got closer, he could see that the town surrounded a giant castle in the middle of it, and Gordon assumed this is where the king resided. The houses looked like something out of the history books he used at school. Each house was very small, with red slate roofing and wooden windows with the shutters tightly fastened shut. They all looked run down and miserable. They needed a bit of TLC, Gordon thought. Then a thought ran through his mind again, where were all the people? It was so quiet that Gordon could hear his own heartbeat, and then, at that very precise moment, he heard a trumpet being played with sharp blasts and no particular tune. It was at that moment Gordon felt the earth under his feet shake. The doors on the houses bust open, and out popped the townfolk, bursting from each door and heading in one direction. Gordon had to act fast, as not to be suspicious, and quickly pulled the tent fabric out of the pouch and shrouded himself in it to cover his clothes and face. It doubled as a great cloak. Anyway, they marched through the town in one direction, and Gordon followed. Some were dressed in rags, others in cloaks. Gordon did his best to fit in and went into the thickest part of the crowd to try and evade any unwanted attention. The sea of villagers marched on, and after what felt like forever, they came to a huge open square and gridded like a chessboard. And then they halted and waited in silence. The trumpet sounded again, but this time seemed much louder than before. A small man who was smartly dressed parted the crowd as Moses did the sea. He had a small orb in his right hand and thrust it up into the air. It levitated above the crowd. A hologram of the king burst out from the little orb. He was sat, like a classical villain, stroking a white furball creature that resembled a large hamster. He began to speak. It wasn't what Gordon was expecting, but the king talked a completely different language, or so Gordon thought.
Schwebbie, great opportunity. You must do everything in my power. You must obey.
It sounded like complete gobbledygook to Gordon until the man in the suit began to speak and translate what the king was saying.
My dear citizens of my kingdom, please rejoice with me as I, your great leader, have done everything I can to give you more bugs and to protect you, keep you safe from the dangers beyond the Great Barrier.
The king made another attempt to talk to the people. Magic, no. To which the translator jumped in again.
Remember, the people beyond the barrier will threaten our way of life and try to steal what I have given you.
The king spoke again, but I'll just let the translator speak to you because I hate speaking gobbledygook.
So today, as a celebration and congratulations to you all for following orders, I have decided that you will receive extra worm spaghetti for your evening meals tonight.
Gordon forgot himself and said out loud,
Yuck!
Everything stopped. Silence for a moment. And at that very moment, Gordon knew he was in the trouble, as the crowd gasped and the hologram vanished. The translator immediately looked around as the orb that projected the hologram darted into and out of the crowd. The translator put the orb close to his lips and said,
Find.
No sooner had he said it, the orb flew again into the air, darting around the crowd, searching for someone who wasn't meant to be there, and by that someone I mean Gordon. The orb began scanning the faces of the townspeople who willingly took their hoods down to be scanned. To say Gordon's heart was beating was a bit of an understatement. It was beating about 10,000 million times per hour. He tried not to panic and to keep his cool, slowly stepping backwards in the crowd, but the orb was very thorough in its quest to find the suspected criminal. Gord nearly reached the outer edge of the circle when one of the villagers shouted,
He's here, my lord!
Needless to say, Gordon thought, forget this, and began to run, pushing his way past the villagers. They tried to grab him, but they were all so weak, and Gord managed to lose the crowd, but now the orb, it was gaining on him, so Gordon had to think fast on how he would avoid the orb. He thought of all his heroes and what they would do. The thinking process wasn't very good when you were in the trouble. In trouble, basically. So what would Gordon do? He had to think about this one. He had to use his head. But Gordon didn't have any weapons or anything. It was pure pandemonium. He didn't know what to do. Gordon reached for the magical pouch as he ran between the houses to confuse the orb. He fumbled around inside the pouch and tried to get his hands on everything, anything he could, and then it hit him. A good idea. To stall for time, he pulled the tent off himself. You know, the one he was using as a cloak. Just thought I'd remind you. And he threw it into the road behind him, and it magically set itself up. The orb flew inside the tent, and this gave Gordon a bit more time and a bit of a lead, he thought. But the orb was pretty fast. The orb was inside the tent, darting up and down. Then it stopped mid-flight and analyzed its surroundings. Then a stream of fire shot out of the small opening on the front, incinerating the tent and reducing it to ash. The orb flew out of the smoke in pursuit of Gordon. Gordon was slowing down and didn't know where to go or what to do, and just as he was about to stop, someone or something grabbed his collar on his shirt and dragged him inside a building. The orb shot past, frantically searching for Gordon. Gordon was in complete darkness, panting like a tired dog. He didn't know where he was or who had dragged him here, but he was thankful he was not being chased. But he was still petrified of the unknown character who had effectively kidnapped him. A match struck and illuminated the room. The match floated in the darkness to a candlestick on the side and lit up the room. As his vision adjusted to the room and his surroundings became clear, it looked like a tavern he had visited on one of his favorite video games. More candles were lit and brightened the room even further. Behind the big wooden bar were barrels stacked to the roof. Gordon wondered what kind of drink they held and was eager to have a try. But it wasn't time to think about that, Gordon. Then the hairs on his neck stood on end as he heard someone take a deep breath behind him. Not taking another moment to think, Gordon shot across to the bar and spun around to see his newfound enemy and got a shock as he was standing across from a little old man. The little old man pulled a small pair of spectacles from his pocket and spat on the lenses and rubbed them on his shirt.
Well then, bloody hell, lad, what lad doing running around the air away from rest on idiots outside? What's that done that's so bad?
Just as Gordon was about to answer, the madman cut him off.
Oh, I know who they are, Gordon. I was joking around with thee. Ella said that might be coming and asked if I'd help thee. I said, go on then. I said, help him. No, go on, but I'll need paying summat, so she said that'd send me some gold my way.
The man's accent was so familiar to Gordon, and he had to ask.
Are you from Barnsley in South Yorkshire?
Aye, and what on it, lad?
Nothing, it's just I'm from there too.
Nah, then another Barnsley lad. Well, I bet they're a tough kid to be trying to get Schwebbie's castle, I know.
The little old man looked a tiny bit drunk and was slurring his words, but Gordon gave a sigh of relief and sat at one end of the bar on a bar stool. He was without picking a very descriptive word, he was buggered.
I'll bet thou wants to wet thee whistle a bit then, lad.
The man walked behind the bar and pulled out a tankard and turned to the barrels and poured an orange liquid into a cup. Gordon was curious, anxious, excited to try it, but then remembered that the king's subjects were given bug pasta or spaghetti or something, so he thought, what was this, bug juice? The old man smiled as he thought he could tell what Gordon was thinking.
Don't thee bloody worry, lad. This ain't none of that Schwebbie crap. It's me magical Barnsley brew.
He pointed to the top of the barrel.
That turns it this way for the good stuff, me brew, and that turns it t'otherward for Schwebbie's crap. I've got to keep up appearances in case, they come in here and tell lad, this special brew will recover the stamina and make you feel great.
Gordon smiled and took the very large tanker in his hand and put it to his lips and took a huge swig. With a huge Gordon recovered from the sprinting he had done and felt very refreshed.
Nah then, lad, me name's Bert, with a Bert with a B, and it's nice to meet thee, lad, but I'll be needing me gold from Ella, that knows. I've got to pay bills, lad-o.
Gordon reached into the pouch and produced 3 gold coins and slid them across to Bert.
Nah, then, bloody hell, cheers, lad. That's bloody brilliant. I'd have helped thee anyway from out, but Ella insisted, I know. I've got bills to pay and I use it just for trading, so I need to make this special brew. It helps people, town folk, I help folks who want to escape from me, if they ain't noticed. They're all weakened, that's all my special brew gives them energy to get them where Ella is for a better life. They knows story, don't they, lad?
Gordon was ready to make a plan to get his Nannan and Grandad out of the castle and back home. No sooner had he thought this, Bert began to speak again.
Now then,
It was as if he just wouldn't stop.
now then, lad, there. We need to get thee inside that castle, and I think I've figured out how to do it.
Gordon nodded in agreement and put his head into his hands, trying to think of how he would get around all the guards and people in the city.
I've got it, lad.
Gordon jumped out of his skin and listened to Bert intensely.
Thou knows that pouch there on this side. I can bet it's from Ella, 'cause I've seen it afore. And thou can use that. How? I'm getting to that now, so I'm gonna stuff thee inside it.
Wait a minute. I'm too big.
I know, but it's a magic pouch, han't thou been watching? Thou's been listening, she's told thee about it. Thou too big. Thou'll have no trouble getting in there.
Yeah, but why are you going to put me in this pouch?
Because, and thou thought about it, I'll turn thee into guards and say, thou ran past me tavern and drop this, and out contraband, out like that, where they think they're going to track thee down and prison thee. They'll love it. They'll take it into castle, won't they? Then thou can take it from thee, lad, can't thou? Bloody hell.
But what will I do when they take it into the castle? They'll just... I don't know.
All right, lad. Oh, they take it to castle, there's got to take it to safe room first. So they'll leave it there, so that's me safe room. And they're just going to have to figure a way out. That's the only way I can help thee, lad.
Gordon nodded in agreement and thought he would be able to come up with another plan when he was there.
Right then, lad. In thou goes, and I'll turn it in. Oh, excuse me. Oh, I've had a bit of that stuff. I'll turn thee into guards, and I say to thee now, lad.
Bert put his hand on Gordon's shoulder.
Good luck.
Bert slapped Gordon on the back, and before Gordon could reply, Bert took the pouch and opened it and put it over Gordon's head and dragged it downwards. The pouch expanded and swallowed Gordon whole. It was very dark inside the pouch, but Gordon had plenty of room to get comfortable. He could hear Bert whistling and walking for what seemed like forever until he heard two other voices. It must be the guards, Gordon thought.
Hey, you now then, cocker. I've found this bag outside... Oh, excuse me, love. I've found this bag outside me tavern. It must have been from that stranger, and obviously, I you know me, I'm honest as they come, and I will report anything thou knows. Here, take it. I would love a reward or anything. If thou wants to get, I can drop it off at tavern, cocker. Cheers, love. All right, then, thanks. Thank you for being a good citizen. Here is 2 coin credits for extra bugs,
said the guard.
All right, cheers, cocker,
replied Bert. As the conversation came to a close, Gordon felt he was on the move again. After a short while, he felt as if everything stopped and assumed he must be in the royal safe. Then another dilemma struck Gordon's mind. He forgot to ask Bert how he was going to get out of the pouch. After taking a moment to think, he looked around and picked up the rope and took a strand of it and grabbed a rather large match. Tying the match to the string, Gordon began throwing the match to the small opening in the top of the pouch. After what seemed like a million attempts, the match finally bridged the gap in the top of the pouch, and then Gordon tugged on the rope. It felt very secure, so he began to climb. It took him a while, but he still felt the magnificent energy from Bert's special brew coursing through his veins and slowly but surely got to the opening. Then, as he emerged from the pouch, he began growing to normal size. Taking a huge breath of air, Gordon found himself in pitch-black darkness. He fumbled around for the pouch and finally found it again. Rummaging around, he plucked a match out of the pouch and struck it. The flames sparked to life and revealed piles of gold, trinkets, candles, swords, shields, chairs and tables, and too much to describe, but it had lots of fancy stuff, and I'll leave it to your imagination. Gordon lit the candle he found and pulled a chair up to a huge wooden table in the centre of the room and sat, looking around, trying to think how he would get out and where the emergency exit was. He leaned back on his chair and put his head to the sky and found a possibility. There was a ventilation shaft at the top of the room, and it looked big enough to fit a Gordon-sized person at least. So, nearly falling off the chair, Gordon began piling up the tables and chairs and clambered up until he got to the vent. What Gordon didn't expect was to see two sets of eyes staring back at him from inside the vent. Gordon froze as his heart beat into his mouth. Then a familiar voice came from the vent. "What the heck are you doing here, Gordon?" It was Grandad, Dick and Nannan and Brenda!
Hello, love.
Hello.
Gordon was so shocked that they were both in a ventilation shaft, staring at him. How weird. "Now then, Gordon, let's get you out of there and into here with us so we can find a way out."
How are you going to open the vent, Grandad?
"What have I told you, Gordon? Always carry the multi-tool I got you for Christmas. I bet you left yours at home. Well, I take mine everywhere. You never know when it'll come in handy, like times when you're stuck in a lunatic's castle in a ventilation shaft." Grandad took his marvellous multi-tool and flipped out a screwdriver attachment and began undoing the screws in the vent. After he took out 3 screws, the door swung open and Grandad Dick grabbed Gordon, pulling him into the vent for a bear hug.
What's that you've got, Gordon?
Said Nannan and Brenda, pointing at the pouch.
Oh, it's a magic pouch. A what? What is it? It's just got things like matches, rope, and a little bit of chocolate. My secret stash chocolate, Gordon. Have you been in there?
Gordon hesitated, and before he could say, Nannan and Brenda said,
It's okay, love. I'd have given you some anyway.
Right. We have to navigate our way out of this castle without getting caught, and to do that we could do with a good navigation tool. Perhaps I can make something like a compass, and then... Gordon butted in, as he knew his grandad had a habit of going into a never-ending story.
Oh, we can use this magical map in the pouch.
Gordon pulled out the map, and it had changed to the plans for the castle and their exact location.
Wait a minute,
said Gordon.
How did you manage to escape the prison cell?
Well, when we were in the prison cell, I began talking to the guard, and after about 30 minutes chatting, he very rudely fell asleep. So I took the opportunity to steal his keys, and we snuck out into the guard's toilet, and I found a ventilation shaft, and here we are. The moment Grandad Dick stopped talking, they heard an alarm sound and assumed it was because they had escaped. So, thinking quickly, Grandad pushed the furniture Gordon built up, and it went crashing down. Grandad Dick replaced the vent, and they turned to face the dark shaft. Gordon struck another match, to which Nannan lit a cigarette and began smoking.
Now isn't the time, Nannan.
The glow of the cigarette lit up the ventilation shaft just enough for them to see. Gordon said something he thought he would never, ever, ever say, as he hated smoking.
Nannan, smoke like you've never smoked before. We need the light. We need to see.
Nannan shrugged her shoulders and led the way while Grandad Dick used the map to navigate. After 8 right turns and 6 left ones, they reached the light at the end of the shaft. When they looked out of the vent, they could see the sea and waves below crashing onto the castle wall. As they looked at the sea crashing into the castle, the alarm was super loud in the background, and it was time to make a decision. Go back and face the guards, or climb down and face the sea. Gordon pulled the rope from the bag, and as Grandad unscrewed the vent cover, it swung open. They all peered over the edge and took a big gulp. Gordon could see a barred window just below and tied the rope around his waist and gave the rope to Nannan and Grandad, who held it tight and nodded as they knew what Gordon was going to do. Taking a deep breath, Gordon began to descend the castle wall. He felt like Tom Cruise on Mission Impossible and could hear the theme music in his head. Gordon reached the window and peered through the bars. The coast was clear, and he could just squeeze through. Untying the rope, he attached the pouch and told Nannan and Grandad to pull it back up. He scanned the room in which he was standing in, and there were old wooden lockers with guards' uniforms hung up. He shouted out of the window to Nannan and Grandad.
I'm in the guard's locker room. Use the map to get to the vent in the ceiling, and I'll meet you in there.
Nannan and Grandad acted fast and went back into the ventilation system, following the map to the guard's locker room. All Gordon could do was wait and wait and wait. It seemed to be taking them ages to find it, and so Gordon took a seat on one of the benches. The guards must have been on alert and searching the castle for them, so Gordon figured they probably wouldn't come in here, but he was wrong. The door burst open and a tall, thin guard burst into the room with a demonic stare and advanced towards Gordon. His breath smelt of old onions and dog farts. There was nowhere for our little Gordy to hide, and so he simply closed his eyes tight and held his hands up in surrender. Fearing his demise, Gordon's butt cheeks were clenched so tightly. After a few seconds, he heard a huge clash and a squeal. Opening his eyes, Gordon couldn't believe what he saw. It was Grandad Dick. He was stood on top of the guard, looking rather pleased with himself. He had pancaked the guard to the floor. The guard was squirming and not too pleased, might I add.
What do we do now, Grandad?
Just as Grandad was about to offer a suggestion, Nannan Brenda, like a ninja assassin, descended from the ventilation shaft and administered a swift karate chop to the guard, which knocked him clean out. K.O. With not a moment to spare, Grandad Dick tied the guard's hands with the rope and shoved him into one of the wooden lockers.
Where do we go from here? Let's do what they do in the films. I think it might just be crazy enough to work.
Grandad and Gordon looked at each other and were quite perplexed at what Nannan was trying to say.
Let's disguise ourselves as guards.
Oh, yeah! So they each raided the lockers and dressed as guards. Then they agreed to look at the magical map and head for the magical barrier. Seeing as there was an alert going on, they each ran out of the room and headed for the front door. Along the way, they passed the great vault where Gordon had piled the furniture sky high and could see the guards inside. They were inspecting the pile of rubble he used to climb to the vent. They all looked very puzzled as to what the tables and chairs were doing in such a big heap. Gord, Nannan, and Grandad scurried past with an air of alert as though they were searching for the prisoners like they were guards. They reached the front door and went into a huge courtyard filled with guards searching frantically. Our trio didn't stop. They bolted until Nannan froze in the middle of the courtyard, making Gordon and Grandad stop, wondering why she had stopped. Nannan gestured to the boys to follow her, and without hesitation they did. They ran over to the stables where they were greeted by a troop of silky black horses. To say they looked magnificent was an understatement. Each of them took a horse and clambered into the saddle, which was already fastened to the horse's back. With only basic knowledge of horse riding, they each did as cowboys did on the films and said, "Giddy up!" It worked, and the horses flew from the stables and shot into the courtyard, knocking over a few guards, but who cared really? They were trying to escape. The guards now knew where the prisoners were. The horses were like lightning and sped through the city at a ferocious speed. Each of the riders had to hold tight with all their might, or they would have flown off. The trumpet alarm sounded, which spread through the city, and all the residents slowly marched into the streets, trying to block the path, but the horses were too quick and outmaneuvered every obstacle. Flying through the city on the horses meant they reached the forest with lightning speed, and what took Gordon nearly a day to travel took the horses a few hours. The guards and translator man were in fast pursuit with a hologram of King Shwebbie hovering next to them. Gordon hadn't realized how many extra chins the king had until he saw the hologram up close. It was a fierce race, but Gordon, Nannan and Grandad had too much of a lead and were at the bridge with the magical barrier. They rode through the barrier, and Schwebbie and his men screeched to a dramatic halt, scowling at the three intruders. Gordon pulled his tongue out at them and turned and rode the horses back to the chip shop. Outside the chip shop, Polly swept the steps as Chips the bull mastiff laid cool, calm, and collected, watching them lethargically wagging his tail. Once Polly saw the three of them, she dashed over and gave her Nannan a big hug. Then, of course, Grandad, and finally Gordon. Ella must have heard all the commotion as she stepped outside of the shop to welcome them back.
Well done on rescuing your Nannan and Grandad. We kind of rescued each other in the end.
Gordon gave his Nannan and Grandad some credit.
How are we going to get home?
Said Nannan, who was craving her soap operas and a nice warm bath. Ella frowned and looked quite puzzled, which Gordon picked up, and he said,
You don't know, do you?
Ella shook her head. There was a moment of despair, as they all stood in silence, defeated at the prospect of remaining here forever. Then she had a light bulb moment, but before she could speak, Chips stood up and began to smell the air as if something excited him. Strings of drool that resembled shoelaces formed at the side of his floppy chops. He advanced towards Grandad, who, at this point, looked a little concerned, as if he was about to be eaten alive. Chips circled around the back of Grandad and put his entire head into the magical pouch Grandad had tied to his belt. Ella pulled Chips's head out of the bag, and his teeth were in a bar of chocolate that Gordon, if you remember, had snook from Nannan's secret stash. Ella clicked her fingers, and Chips opened his mouth and let her reach inside, retrieving the chocolate bar.
He must have read my mind. I was going to ask if you had something from your world, so that Chips could get a scent of it and take you back. He is a magical dog with many gifts. But how? Here, look.
Ella placed the chocolate under Chips's nose, and apart from making him drool more, his eyes widened and lit up, and he started to look around as if searching for something.
Right,
said Ella.
Get on his back.
What?
What?
They all said.
Climb on.
So they all squished themselves onto Chips's back.
Have a safe ride home,
Ella said, and with that, Chips started to run, and, may I say, for a bull mastiff, he ran rather fast. Leaving Ella waving in the distance, Chips and the family on his back were headed towards the edge of a cliff, and needless to say, they were all a little bit petrified, and they didn't know what was going on. They thought they were going to plunge to their doom. Chips ran to the cliff's edge and leaped off, plummeting downwards towards the rocks below. as the rocks got closer and closer, and just before they reached the bottom, they all closed their eyes, expecting to be pancaked, but then nothing. They all opened their eyes, and they were flying through the air. Up, up, and away. Chips could fly, and he did it magnificently while following his nose. He was headed for a small white cloud that looked slightly more fluffy than the rest. Needless to say, that's where they were going. They plunged straight into the cloud and got that feeling you get when you go down too fast in an elevator. After spinning so fast, the swirling stopped, and they waited for their heads to stop spinning and recognize the familiar surroundings of Nannan and Grandad's house. Chips sat his bum onto the floor, and they all slid off and landed in a pile next to Nannan's magical quilt. Cookie, their little jacksu, was sat staring into space and then turned her attention to Chips. They exchanged glances as if they communicated a secret message. Then Chips turned his head, put his face into the quilt, and vanished. Nannan got her walking stick and used it to move the quilt into the corner of the room so nobody accidentally got sucked in. Then Gordon remembered his mum was here. He remembered seeing her just before he got sucked into the quilt.
"Mum?"
he shouted. Nothing, no reply, just the sound of the ticking grandmother clock in the opposite corner of the room. And so they all began searching for Mum, splitting off into two teams, Gordon and Grandad, Polly and Nannan. They looked all over the house and found no trace of her. Looking out of the window, Polly noticed her car was right where she had left it. Finally, they all reconvened in the living room and couldn't understand where she had vanished to. Cookie gave her classical whine, as if she wanted something, and they all looked at her. Her head slowly, and may I add, quite menacingly shot towards the quilt, with her eyes fixed on it. Something told them that Cookie knew exactly where Mildred was, and now the family did too. If you would like more from the adventures of Gordon, please like, share, subscribe, and enjoy, and I will write more stories. Please leave a comment. Have a fantastic day, everyone. Thanks for listening.